Day 129 to 6:42 p.m. Newton Lake, Veterans Memorial Park, Oakland, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Mark, Shemetris, and Ilya watched the boy float and fade out like a ghost. In an instant, his presence in the surroundings vanished as if he never existed. The eye called ninth finally left. Although Mark had not vented all of his anger for what happened, in the least, he could relax now. And as Mark lost all the tension from the events that had just ended, his body felt heavy. His head was throbbing hard, and his body was shivering a bit. "You all right?" Shemetris asked. "I know you are angry, me too, since Ilya also got harmed. But, is it worth it to torture yourself like that?" Hearing those words only made Mark shake his head slightly and shrug. Mark planned on hiding this fact, but it seemed like Shemetris noticed. The new ability he awakened came with a huge setback. He was able to share the emotions of a target to others in raw form and not just by affecting their minds. That, however, could only be achieved by using his mind as the medium. In simple words, while he slowly made the enemies suffer while killing them, he was also experiencing the same suffering they had. Other people would not be able to do this at all, even if they achieved the same realm as an empath. The fortunate thing was that the pain he felt would not linger for too long before disappearing. Furthermore, he was too enraged to feel it at all. After all, people tend to forget and not feel many things when they got swallowed by their extreme emotions. Furthermore, some people say that pain is the best way to remember things. In the future, I will remember that this happened because I hesitated. That way, I won't let history repeat itself. Mark said as he kneeled down and caressed May's head. "Humans are really complicated." Ilya spoke with a complicated expression. "Wait, you two are demons, right?" Ilya became confused. At first, she did not notice, but when Mark and May concealed their wings, they felt no different from humans. "They are humans with demon blood," Shemetris interjected. "Ah, I see now." Ilya nodded in understanding. Mark checked May's current state. It looked like she was already fine but still needed rest. "What are your plans?" Mark asked Shemetris. "If you two don't have anywhere to go, why not go to my place instead?" Those words were enough for Ilya and Shemetris to understand. Mark was asking for an alliance. Shemetris turned to Ilya. "Do we have anywhere to go?" Ilya tapped her chin. She seemed to be unsure. "We have the group I led with Jude, but I only used them to gather more energy to revive Master. They're useless now since the seal is already broken." "How about the Creator's lair?" "No, I think it should be called a laboratory by modern standards." That question from Shemetris made Ilya shake her head. A lot of things have changed since 5,000 years ago. Even geography included. I don't know where that place is now or if it still exists. "That's true." Shemetris nodded. There, Shemetris decided on what they would do first. "Mark, thank you for the invitation. But, you two are not going to join us, right?" Mark replied. "We will, but not right now. I don't want to join you and without giving something in return. If I'm correct, it's called leeching off, right? Just your presence is already fine, though. That is not enough." Shemetris shook his head. "If we managed to find my Creator's laboratory, we might be able to bring back some good things. Another thing is that I don't feel comfortable with my current face. It feels like I will get unnecessary enemies just because of this face alone." Hearing that reason, Mark could only nod. If Mark brought Shemetris with him right now, Felicia and her family would definitely act violently. "Then, we'll be going," Shemetris said as he carried Ilya flapped his wings. "All right. See you two later. Take this." Shemetris made one of his golden feathers float towards Mark. "After we found my Creator's laboratory, we'll come looking for you." And with those words, Shemetris and Ilya flew away towards north. "They really are in a hurry," Mark murmured as he saw the silhouettes of the two vanish into the night. However, it was not a bad thing. It was better to move faster even more. The news that Ninth brought them was not something to joke at. It would dictate the fate of the world. And now, It was no wonder that Ouroboros was being too active now. It was the same for the cultivators. Although the lower members of these factions were not supposed to know about it, their leaders must have told them to grow stronger. Now, those that received that order were going everywhere to find their own ways. Nevertheless, Mark could not help but think of one thing. Why did the observer have a change of heart? He chased away the gods and did more things so that humans could dominate the planet once more. But with the new rules, the very same humans would get implicated. Mark sighed. This was not a good time or place to think about it. As Mark stored the golden feather that Demetrius left behind, he decided to scour the bloody battlefield to see if he could get something to loot, especially the flying swords that the cultivators had. But there, Mark realized a troublesome thing. He was just a single person, but he needed to carry 2 unconscious girls back. ******** Day 129 to 6:30 p.m. Devil's Den, Gettysburg, Adams County, Pennsylvania, United States of America. The Devil's Den. In the past, it was a historical landmark mentioned in the records of the Battle of Gettysburg. Many tourists would visit this boulder-strewn hill, not only to see its odd appearance but to see the remnants of the past. This place, however, was not only known for good things. Being a place where soldiers died in the war, it was also known among the most haunted places in the state of Pennsylvania. In the past, it was just a historical landmark, a tourist spot, and a haunted place. Now, however, another of its mysteries unfolded. A small fortress now stood at the same hill. It was not just a regular fortress, though, but a strange one. In one look at this fortress, even the densest person would realize that there was something mysterious going on in this place. Inside its walls, both humans and non-humans inhabited the place. At this moment, several beams of light fell onto the fortress. The people in the fortress were surprised and made way for the beams in a calm manner. As the beams of light landed onto the main square of the fortress, each beam turned into several people and a thunderbird. "It's Oryx and Melis," the people around exclaimed. Without a doubt, this fortress was one of the outposts of Ouroboros. Since humans were present in this place, it was the indication that it was a fortress for outer members of the organization. Oryx, the white-haired man, and Melis, the red-haired witch, looked around as they appeared. Seeing that they safely landed inside the fortress, the two slumped on the ground. They were still conscious and could stand up and walk. However, they expended the last of their magical powers, leaving them weakened severely. Puff! Both Oryx and Melis vomited blood. It was the backlash of the magic they used to escape. "Sir Oryx, what happened?" A young man hurriedly approached to help Oryx up. "Don't bother about me. Help our brothers and sisters first." Oryx shrugged the help of the young man and pointed at the unconscious men and witches that were left of their group. Since he was commanded to do so, the young man told the others to help their unconscious members. My, what happened to you two?" A jeering voice sounded. It came from a blonde-haired witch that came out after hearing the commotion. "Also, where are the other members of your group? Your group was just supposed to scout the unusual activities in Reading City." Phew! Melis spat out the remaining blood on her mouth. "Agatha, don't annoy us. We almost died after encountering a monster. If you're in our place, I don't think that you will even make it back." The witch called Agatha frowned. What really happened? At that question, both Oryx and Melis stood up. "We'll tell you later," Oryx replied. "We need to meet the chief first and report what happened." With those words, despite staggering in their steps, Oryx and Melis entered deeper in the fortress. As the two left, a witch about 15 years old approached Agatha. The young witch was not walking but was floating while sitting on a basketball-sized crystal ball. "Aina, can you find out what happened to them?" Agatha said to the young witch. Aina did not reply but only jumped off her crystal ball and wiped her index finger to the blood vomited by Melis and Oryx. Then, she wiped the blood on the floating crystal ball. The gallery saw what the two were doing and approached to see what would happen. And there, horror had struck everyone as they saw everything that happened to the group led by Oryx and Melis. However, when Agatha saw Chimetrus's face, she was shocked. Jude, she murmured as she remembered what happened several years ago. It was when Jude seduced her in Atlantic City. She could still remember how he told her sweet nothings and how he abandoned another woman for her, only to be sold to an underground group. That all happened to her when she was still a regular human. Asterisk 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 day 129 AA. An unknown dimension. It was a place where mortals could not step into. As for the beings that knew about this place, it was called the observatory. It was a place where the observers dwelled as they observed the world through the eyes. At this moment, a robed person whose gender or face could not be confirmed was pacing back and forth in irritation. Without a doubt, this person was the current observer of Earth. The observer saw everything that happened in front of Ninth. It's amazing that Earth is able to produce two god candidates now. The observer was quite elated to find Mark and May. At these times where the world was facing its end, what the world needed was strong beings that could face this end and try to prevent it. Thus, new rules were implemented even if it defied the previous rules they had. After all these rules were useless if there was no world to implement it. What irritated the observer, however, was that the next wave that would come. If that idiot from Melvistea did not mess up with the world he is managing, this would not have happened. The observer seethed in anger. And now, this universe is on the verge of collapse because of him. Right now, a lot of habitable planets, not only in this galaxy, but this universe that Earth belonged to was facing a huge calamity. It was a calamity that continued to spread, destroying all lives, and erasing planets from existence. And now, it was Earth's turn. The worst thing, however, the observers that cherished the planets they were managing could not directly interfere. The best that they could do was bend the rules they already had and wish for the best to happen. Thus, Ninth finding Mark and May was a good thing for the observer. The observer did not care anymore if Mark and May would tilt the balance of the world. As long as it was saved, the observer could compromise. Still, the observer could only lament. After all, both Mark and May were still young. The path to godhood was not easy to traverse, especially for humans, no matter what kind of blood flowed in their veins. Day 129 to 7:02 p.m. Devil's Den, Gettysburg, Adams County, Pennsylvania, United States of America. So, how will you two explain yourselves? A grim-sounding voice echoed inside the dimly lit main hall of the fortress. The voice came from the seat that appeared to be a sinister-looking throne. Nevertheless, there was no one sitting on it. Instead, there was a towering blue flame floating over the throne. Despite just being an odd-colored fire, however, it gave the strange feeling of being alive. And in fact, it was. In front of the throne, Oryx and Melis were prostrating. Considering the mental and physical injuries they had, just this posture could already be counted as a painful punishment. To the side, Aina was present as she showed the flames what happened using her crystal ball. And to the question of that blue-colored flame, both Oryx and Melis could not utter a single word. Your team, composed of 3 groups, should be at the outpost, preparing to investigate the unusual activities in Reading City. Yet, your group took our fastest Thunderbird and went on your way. It would have been fine if you two managed to bring back anything valuable. Yet, not only your group returned without achieving anything, but you two lost most of your members. Even the Thunderbird is heavily injured. Do you two think that an injury of the Thunderbird is easy to heal? The voice coming from the flame was seething in anger. The manner it spoke seemed to have valued the Thunderbird more than the dead members of the organization. After hearing no reply, the blue flame flickered. Have your injuries treated and wait for your punishment. In the meantime, Agatha and Ortox will take up your positions. Leave. With difficulty, Oryx and Melis dragged their bodies out of the main hall. Aina, the blue flames called out to the young witch. What is your opinion about this? Unexpectedly, the unknown being that both Oryx and Melis were afraid of was asking the young girl for her opinion. Aina stared at the flames floating above the throne. Unexpectedly, there was not a shred of fear on her expression. Outside, Aina was known as a quiet girl that would not even respond to questions or talk about herself. She did not seem timid, but just had this kind of personality. However, as she faced the flames, there seemed to be a slight expression of superiority from her gestures. "You want my opinion?" Unexpectedly, Aina answered. If others were present in this room, they would have been shocked. "You are correct," the blue flame replied. "I have some thoughts on this matter, but I want to confirm your opinion." "Then, let the matter go and concentrate on more pressing matters," Aina replied as her crystal ball showed a blurry scene in Reading City. "We don't need to pick fights with other powerful beings. Securing our territory comes first. Especially right now that a group of unique people appeared within our boundaries and is building some sort of base or outpost. Remember that we need to secure our territory before the second wave struck," Aina added. "If that is your decision, then I will follow," the blue flame replied. "Though it's a pity that we can't use our fastest Thunderbird for several decades because of its injuries." "It can't be helped," Aina agreed. "Elemental beings like Thunderbirds and Phoenixes have a unique body composition. Potions and healing magic will not work on them." "Well then," the blue flame seemed to have decided, "we will prioritize the group in Reading City. Oh, by the way," Aina suddenly spoke, "don't unnecessarily provoke that group. Ascertain their purpose first." Why is that?" At that question, Aina two scenes in her crystal ball in succession. The first scene was from Oryx and Melis's memories when one of their Wendigos was defeated by a beautiful girl with a sniper rifle. Specifically, then she kicked the Wendigo's nape with both her legs exuding a red glow. The next scene was another woman. She seemed to be proficient with close-quarters combat. In the crystal ball, the woman could be seen punching through the armor of a heavily armored infected with her arms exuding the same kind of red glow. "You get what I mean?" Aina pointed at the red glow. "The people in Reading City and the ones Oryx and Melis encountered might be related. Don't cause unnecessary trouble. We need to stock up on manpower." "I see. I'll make it sure to tell Agatha and Otrox." "Good." With that word, Aina sat down on her crystal ball and floated out of the main hall. As the blue flame was left alone, it sighed. "I really can't understand why our queen is disguising as an apathetic girl in this fortress for outer members." ********************************* Day 129 to 8:41 p.m. The Pagoda, Berks County, Pennsylvania, United States of America. A Japanese-styled landmark at the peak of Mount Penn. At the initial phase of the outbreak, many survivors from Reading City fled to this place to seek safety. With the Reading Regional Airport just at the northwest outskirts of the city, several infected-filled airplanes crashed in this place. This caused sudden chaos, forcing a quick action for the survivors. Thus, many people climbed this mountain and stayed in the pagoda. The pagoda was not a secure place at all. However, being at the mountain peak, having very few access to climb the location, the infected would not easily reach it. And that was also the last place that most of them had been to. It became like that as the next phase of the outbreak started. That was when more and more animals evolved and attacked humans for food. Since it was a mountain, covered with forests, even if there was less predatory animals present, there were a lot of insects, together with the animals that fled from the city like the survivors. For several months, the sole inhabitants of this place were giant insects and evolved animals. That was until a few days ago. It's already the 5th day, right? When will Big Bro and Sis return? The girls miss their parents already. Jaya complained as she viewed the nighttime scenery from the highest floor of the pagoda. She was carrying Theodore, who seemed to be enjoying the dark environment with his adoptive mother. Master and Miss probably found things or people to bring back. Especially Master. He seems to have an obsession with collecting different things, even people to some degree. Odalina said as she tidied up the place as they had just finished eating dinner. It was already late, but they had a lot to do. That might really be the case. Big Bro and Sis will really slow down since they won't be able to fly here directly if they had people in tow. They might even be bringing an infected with them. What Jaya said made Odalina let out a bitter smile. Since it was Mark, bring another infected back was really possible. Right at this moment, the people waiting for Mark and May's return occupied this pagoda. It was the place where they decided to meet up after Mark fought with the puppet of the Great One. At first, they only intended to wait here, visiting the place at fixed intervals. On the second day, however, they noticed some activities from the infected in the city. They started to climb up the mountain after being attracted to the energy fluctuations emitted from the portals that Spera opened. Thus, instead of doing that, they decided to turn the place into an outpost instead. It was all while they wait for Mark and May. And with the people from the base and the Blood Children, it was achieved in no time. Just with the fact that Huey and the others did this for the third time, their work in this pagoda went smoother. Building the main base and the dwellings inside the Night-Evered Spirit Tree was more than enough building practice for everyone. Furthermore, since the Takabalangs and the Dryad already accepted Mark as their master wholeheartedly, even without Mark's orders, they helped secure the place. Around the pagoda was not only living vines but also an illusion that kept not only the infected but also other intruders at bay. The unfortunate thing, however, their activities attracted attention. A group of survivors arrived after they established the outpost. Apparently, these survivors had been living in a condominium building just below the mountain. Since the pagoda was at the peak that could be seen easily, it was no surprise that these survivors noticed the transformation of the pagoda. Among the group of 20 survivors, 10 of them were mutators. Such force could not be neglected easily, and thus, Odalina allowed them in. Of course, with restrictions. These survivors were only allowed at the lowest level of the pagoda. When Mark and May returned, that was when the fates of these survivors would be judged. The appearance of these survivors was still acceptable. However, the appearance of enemies irked everyone. Robed people that tried to trespass stealthily. It was the very same method and the same result after they were captured. Sending shadow people to spy on their activities, there was no doubt that it was the Ouroboros. It was not surprising considering that there was a branch of this organization in Pennsylvania. Still, Spera said that they came too fast. It was as if they were not afraid of the rules to stay hidden anymore. And now, the thing they worry the most was the blatant activity of Ouroboros at the foot of Mount Penn. Why would everyone not notice when the enemies came with flashy thunderbirds as mounts? Furthermore, they used the very same condominium building that the survivors that arrived lived before. From that condominium, the pagoda could be clearly seen. It was the same for people in the pagoda. It had been 2 days since it started. Furthermore, several skirmishes already happened. The encounters were not threatening. It was more like the members of Ouroboros testing Odalina and the others. Knowing that they were being tested, Odalina told everyone to not show all their cards just in case. Flap. Flap. Loud flapping sounds echoed as a large shadow approached the pagoda. It was one of the reasons the other party was hesitant to attack this place. It was Chaflar. Several hours ago, a strange fluctuation of energy was felt by almost everyone. When they saw a thunderbird with several people on it fly away in a hurry, Spera, together with Colleen, Carla, and Haley, tried to follow while riding on Chaflar. "How is it?" Odalina asked as Spera went down from Chaflar's back. Spera could only shake her head. "That thunderbird is too fast. We're not able to catch up. The bastards flew up the clouds. That is why we lost them quickly." Haley grumbled. "We really need people with high sensitivity towards different kinds of magical energy." Colleen stepped in with a suggestion. Everyone could only nod at this. Although everyone felt that fluctuation, no one here was able to pinpoint the exact direction. In fact, Mark was the only one with the capability of detecting energies over a long distance in their camp. Although there were also others like the Dryad, the scope was small. Thus, rather than flying without a concrete goal, Spera's group decided to return. "But what took you all so long?" Odalina could not help but ask. "There," Alana spoke, pointing at Chaflar's back. We stopped by a mall to get supplies and some clothes for the guys below. Of course, Alana was talking about no other than the survivors they let in. Odalina's eyebrows could not help but twitch as she saw the boxes that Chaflar was carrying. That was not just some. Odalina rubbed her temples. You all probably brought more than half of the stock of a clothing store with you. Just whose idea is this? And as a response to that question, the group of girls, including Carla, pointed to Colleen. Day 129 to 9:03 p.m. The Pagoda, Berks County, Pennsylvania, United States of America. At the lowest floor of the pagoda, the survivors from the condominium building at the foot of Mount Penn checked the clothes they received. Without a doubt, they were delighted. Most of them were living in that condominium building. The whole building became chaotic when the outbreak started. Almost all the people inside the building either died or became infected in the first few hours. Most that managed to survive and hide in their units already got bit. That caused more deaths as families and friends started eating each other, leaving with some that was fortunate. It was the very cause as to why half of the survivors were mutators. The survivors managed to keep the top floor and the rooftop of the building clear of the infected. It was because, at the start, there were more of them on the top floor. With the help of the mutators, they managed to get by despite having a hard time gathering supplies. Because of that, as time went by, their numbers became lesser and lesser. Some died, some left. Not everyone would stay in place and, despite the danger, would try their luck somewhere else that slowly rot, facing an inevitable future. One of their struggles was decent clothing. After all, without enough water supply, they could not wash their clothes. When scavenging, food came at the top of the list. Thus, receiving new clothes, despite being a bit dusty, they were very gratified. Furthermore, their lives when they arrived here in the pagoda was far better than when they stayed at the condominium building. It was good that they took the gamble, although it also meant losing some people along the way. In a sense, it was upsetting that these survivors were already numb about things concerning death, but with their previous situation, it could not be helped at all. And now, the ones that managed to survive had a better life these past 2 days. Unfortunately, this group was not a harmonious one. Get away. We'll choose ours first. A group of 5 men pushed the others away to force the privilege of choosing clothes. And of course, the others could only make way. It was because all these 5 were mutators. These bastards are at it again. The others could only murmur at the side. However, as they did not want any more conflict to arise, they could only let these 5 do what they wanted. Of course, if they did not cross the line. If those 5 did, the other 5 mutators would not stand by idly. However, once a battle occurred between the two groups, the ones affected the most were the remaining members. And sadly, they were mostly non-combatants. Among the 10 mutators of these survivors, 7 were men with varying ages, while 3 were women. As for the non-combatants, 4 had ages of 13 to 17 with 2 boys and 2 girls. Lastly, among the remaining 6, there was a middle-aged couple, 3 men in their late 20s, and 2 women in their early 20s. On average, this group had more younger members. It was not hard to know what happened to the older ones. At the highest level of the pagoda, those 5 are really bad, aren't they? Colleen said as she watched the feed on the laptop in front of her. Bad. Bad people. Carla pointed at the screen with great conviction. Carla, don't shout. Alana patted Carla's violet hair. The bad people will hear you. Hearing what Alana said, Carla covered her mouth in panic. That action made everyone watching giggle. Unknown to the survivors below, since they arrived here, they were already being monitored. Several security cameras were installed at the ceiling of the first level of the pagoda. These cameras were in plain sight. But of course, none of the survivors below paid attention to it. After all, it was already the end of the world. Electricity stopped working a long time ago. No one would suspect that these affixed cameras were still working. Well, at least none of the survivors below except one that was seemingly conscious of the cameras. It was Odalina's idea. After all, Mark only allowed people that passed his criteria into his base. This way, it would be easier to segregate these survivors after Mark and May returned. In fact, most of the good things that these survivors received these past 2 days were on purpose. It was to judge them early on. And sure enough, it was worth it. These survivors had different personalities, and none of it could be seen when Odalina and the others were around. Since the fate of these survivors lay on Odalina and the others, these survivors only showed their positive side. When they turned around, these survivors were itching to kick each other's back, especially those 5 men. Those 5 is really hateful. When we are around, the stares these 5 give are uncomfortable. Spera complained with a pout. That is why we don't let Jaya go down. Alana shrugged. Jaya had no self-awareness. No, rather than not having it, it was more accurate to say that she lost it. Odalina could only reminisce about the times where Jaya was moving around the house without wearing anything. There were even times that she did that in front of Mark. Jaya was not feeling embarrassed, but Odalina and Spera were. What do you all think about her? Colleen pointed at a woman. She's called Vera, right? Alana replied. I think she's good. She's quite responsible and also helps around without any need to be told of what she had to do. Yes, she's a good one. Odalina also agreed. But she's too naive. She didn't even realize that she's being manipulated by best friend. That statement made everyone watching sigh. To this group of women, the secrets of the survivors below were laid bare. To be interested in the affairs of others, these women were surely bored out of their minds. ******* Day 130 to 8:21 a.m. Audubon High School, Audubon, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. The night passed without problems, although it could not be said that it passed peacefully. Because of Chimetrus's revival, a large number of infected roamed the area. These infected were those that came from farther places and did not make it to the event. With the event ending, the remaining infected scattered everywhere, and most of them were attracted to the school where people resided. For the entire night, the whole settlement was in high alert. The soldiers had to implement a stealthy way of eliminating the infected without attracting more of them unnecessarily. Although it succeeded, they were far from clearing the whole place once more. Right at this moment, Mark and May were sitting at the rooftop of the school building, feeling the morning breeze. After being injured by the technique of the elder, May managed to wake up before midnight. However, for the entire night, Mark did not allow her to move from her bed. It was not wrong, since even though she woke up soon, her face was still pale and hurting. May had no choice but to stay in bed and feel delighted as Mark personally fed her dinner. Despite the pain she felt, she slept with a smile as he held his hand tightly. When morning came, May was feeling better. Her injury had not healed yet, but at least, it was not getting worse. It was thanks to the regeneration medicine that they had. If not, it might take longer for May just to wake up from this injury. For the whole night, Mark held onto May's hand while skimming the fragments of memories that the elder left behind. And since it was the most recent event, he immediately found out the technique that the elder used. He could not help but feel mad and relieved at the same time. Sword palms. It was the name of the technique. It was a technique where the user would inject a sharp chi to the bodies of the enemies to damage their bodies from inside. It was a deadly technique. Fortunately, when the elder used this technique, his goal was to torture May and Ilya after they were disabled by this technique. Thus, the attack did not lead to instant death. This was what made Mark mad. It was a close call. The good thing was it did not work that much on May and Ilya's bodies. Ilya had a demon body that was far sturdier than a human's body. May's body, on the other hand, rejected the invading chi, making the injuries she received lighter than the elder expected. After eating breakfast, Mark brought May here to relax and take a breather. Her back still hurt a lot. Thus, Mark did not allow her to move around too much. This also made Mark decide to spend another day here to let May have a good rest. As for Mark, their return last night was tedious. It was not surprising that he was bombarded with questions the moment he returned. Only when they noticed the 2 unconscious girls that he was carrying back that they decided to postpone it. Mark also learned that the event yesterday made Arnold and the others have a hard time. It was because the Queen type and the Empress Spider threw a fit, trying to follow the infected running towards the center of the event. Fortunately, the soldiers had tranquilizers with them, and it thankfully worked after 4 shots. The Empress Spider seemed to be immune to the tranquilizers and continued to wriggle around. However, with its host succumbing to numbness, its resistance was turned to waste. As for the female cultivator that Mark brought back, she woke up far earlier than May. The moment she woke up, however, the first person she saw was Mark. And the first thing she tried to do was to scream in horror. The scream was cut short, however, as Mark hushed her with a glare while pointing at May. Without a doubt, the girl remembered that what happened last night started because May was harmed. She managed to live and did not want to die. She could only cover her mouth tightly as she shrunk herself in the corner of the room, trying to avoid Mark's glare. It was not bad, in the least, she behaved. The girl did not try to escape either, because she might be killed if she did. Or worse, she might undergo the same ordeal that she suffered last night. Well, it was not like she could leave either if she wanted to. Even if she ran out of the school, there would be nowhere she could go with Mark keeping their flying swords with him. Despite her fear, it was better to stay around Mark as she had nowhere to go. She just had to behave and not incur his ire. Mark glanced at May after he noticed something. What's wrong? Did your lips hurt? May was leaning her head on Mark's shoulder. He could not help but ask as May was touching her lips subconsciously while thinking deeply. No, it's not hurt, May replied. Then, she asked a question that made Mark look away. Gerger, how did you make me drink the medicine? So, that was what she was thinking. After all, an unconscious person had no way of drinking the medicine on their own. That was one of the reasons why in hospitals, drugs and nutrients were directly injected into the unconscious patients intravenously. And of course, Mark could not answer the question immediately. It was an emergency yesterday, and he did it without thinking. But it was correct that he made May drink the regeneration medicine from his mouth. Gerger, don't look away. May complained. Do I really have to answer that? You already know the answer, right? May's face looked down, a bit red. It's unfair, she grumbled. Mark sighed. Look at me. Hearing that, May slowly turned to Mark. And there, Mark pecked onto her lips, surprising her. Mark already did it once. He could do it again, though this time, it was just a short one. That's enough, right? Mark smiled, seeing the tomato-faced May. Though her face was like that, there was a smile on her lips as Mark caressed her head gently. Day 130 to 9:10 a.m. Audubon Heights School, Audubon, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Sitting under the morning sun and feeling the cold morning breeze, it was a nice way to relax after everything that happened last night. However, it seemed that their relaxation would be cut short. Sir Mark. Felicia came running and immediately called out after seeing him, but then, she realized. I'm not disturbing you too, aren't I? Of course, she would ask that after seeing how red May's face was. No, it's fine, Mark replied. You're here about Elise, right? How? No, I mean, yes. Felicia was confused as to how Mark knew, but she had to say what she came here for. Elise woke up, but something is wrong with her. Okay, let's go, Mark said, assisting May to stand up. Felicia led Mark and May towards the infirmary. Along the way, there were soldiers everywhere, ready to take drastic actions. Unexpectedly, all the people that should be resting inside the infirmary was now relocated to the hallway. They all watched Mark and May as they arrived. Even Felicia's parents were not an exception. Dad, Roan, how is Elise? Felicia asked her father and older brother, still inside. Abraham, Felicia's father, replied while shaking his head in dismay. Why did lead to this? Candace, Felicia's mother, sobbed. Sir Mark. Do you know what is happening? Abraham turned to Mark to ask while Roan only stared without saying anything. I heard the details from Felicia. Let me check Elise first. I'll go with you. Me too, both Roan and Felicia requested. Mark nodded as there was no reason to decline them. And the reason for all this? Ringggggggggggg. An ear-piercing ring inside Felicia's ear made her stagger. Even Mark could not help but squint his eyes. Felicia, stay closer to Mayor. Don't blame me if you suddenly get knocked out. This was the reason. The moment everyone entered the infirmary, the uncomfortable feeling suddenly set in. In front of the window, Elise stood while sobbing. Sensing that people entered the room, Elise turned around as she wiped the tears on her face with her hands. Who are you two? That was what she asked. According to Felicia, Elise lost her memories. It was not all of her memories, but a lot seemed to have gone missing. When Elise woke up, she seemed to have been shocked by a lot of things, especially because her whole family became older. It seemed that she could not believe what was happening. The next thing they knew was that everyone in the infirmary started hearing ringing noises in their ears that not only made them uncomfortable but also caused many to lose consciousness on the spot. Everyone had no choice but to vacate the infirmary. The people tried to take Elise out of the room. However, all those that came close to her would end up collapsing. Elise's family members were not an exception to this. Mark, that's me. This is May. Mark introduced himself and May as it was the first thing to do. Felicia asked us for help. Help? Elise looked at Felicia. Help for what? Ringggg. The people peeking from the door could not help but retreat as they felt dizzy. Roan was also affected, but he managed to resist. Only Mark, May, and Felicia seemed to be fine this time. Mostly because of May. Felicia. Didn't you run away after arguing with Mom and Dad? Why are you back already? What happened to that Jude you were keen on defending on? And why is everyone older? Even me? What happened? Why are there zombies roaming outside now? Why don't I know anything? Hearing all that, Felicia and Roan had bitter expressions. Just how could they answer all those questions? They did not even know what was going on with Elise, aside from losing memories. Then, Mark asked a question that made Felicia and Roan confused. Then Elise, can you tell me what year is it now? Elise immediately replied as if it was a matter of fact. The answer, however, made her siblings stare at her in shock. Her reply was the year when Felicia ran away from home to elope with Jude. How long has it been after Felicia ran away? Mark asked again, causing Elise to count with her fingers while recalling the days that she remembered before. About 2 months. I'm not sure. Why are you asking that anyway? Mark then turned to Roan. Is there anything notable 2 months after Felicia left? Roan thought hard. He was still unsure about relying on Mark and his strange questions, but as it involved his family, he decided to comply. Then, he remembered. The foundation week in Elise's school? Mark then turned to Elise. When is that foundation week? Next week. Why are you even asking that? Hearing that, Roan realized something. I see now. Roan sighed. It's before that happened, huh? Roan, what happened? Felicia asked. It's when Elise invited me, Mom, and Dad, to attend the school event. Then, we forgot to attend it. Not only Felicia, but Mark and May looked at Roan in disbelief. If it was right, Elise was only around 11 when that happened. To forget a child's school invitation at that time, it was no wonder that her memories rolled back to this time. That might have left a deep mental scar on her. It was no wonder Elise seemed to behave like a child this time, throwing questions in a tantrum. It's because of you, you bollocks. Roan dropped a hand chop on Felicia's head. We are too busy looking for you, and many things passed our mind. What are you all talking about? Elise asked. She was about to cry. You too. Look at what you did. Mark said with a displeased glare. Roan and Felicia talked about that traumatic event without lowering their voices. Of course, to Elise, whose memories rolled back, it was pretty much saying what happened to her future. Ring. The ringing in their ears intensified. Roan fell on his knee, trying to cover his ears. He might have been someone physically strong, but this kind of mental attack was not his forte. She really lost all brakes on her psychic ability. Mark complained. I'll try to calm her down. Mark decided and turned to Felicia and Roan. Felicia, stay close to May. Roan, it's better if you run out. That's if you two don't want your brains to get fried. Fried? What? Felicia's eyes turned wide. She immediately got close to May. May did not seem to have any problems with it. Of course, she would not let Roan get close to her. Roan, you better run out now, Felicia warned her brother. Roan was reluctant to leave. After all, his two younger sisters were in this room. He turned to May and Felicia. He remembered what Mark said to Felicia about closing into May. He thought that he could do that too and tried to. Roan really did not want to leave his sisters in this kind of situation. But a black scythe blocked Roan on his path with its blade in front of his neck. I told you to go out. What is wrong with you? Roan complained. It was not like he had any ulterior motives. He agreed that May was a beautiful woman, but he was not a bastard to aim at someone else's woman. I know that you don't have any ill motives, Mark spoke. The problem is that she had trauma with men. So don't approach her. RRINGGG. Roan staggered as the ringing on his ears intensified. You should go now. Also, tell those people outside to get away from here. Without any choice, Roan hurried out. The ringing in everyone's ears was getting more and more intense for every second that passed. Roan finally left. Mark turned to Elise. She was crying hard. Losing her memories and waking up without it, it was like she was thrown in a world that she never knew. Furthermore, even her mental age rolled back with the loss of her memories. Will it be okay? Felicia asked Mark. I can make it work out. Mark shrugged. But after this, your family will be under me even if you liked it or not. Huh? Felicia was surprised. What do you mean? Mark did not reply and approached Elise. Hey, what do you mean? Felicia shouted and wanted to chase Mark. However, once she left a certain distance around May, intense ringing would assault her mind. She could only retreat back to May. Firming his mind, Mark approached Elise that was on the other side of the room. No, go away. Don't approach me. Of course, it was the normal reaction. A timid girl like Elise would react this way if a stranger she did not know suddenly approached her this way. RRRRRRINGGGGGG. Mark squinted his eyes. This was quite a headache. Every step he took forward, the energy coming from Elise surged out like a tornado inside the room. Soon, Mark reached Elise. Elise tried to retreat, but she was backed into the corner of the room. No. Get away from me. Elise sobbed. Mark then raised his hand, causing Elise to cover her eyes in fear. To this, Mark smiled. Elise was like a cornered cute animal if she was like this, though she was already old to be treated as a child. Elise cried, not knowing that her unstable mind was causing a huge ruckus to everyone around her. There, she felt a hand on her head. It felt strangely warm. Slowly, she peeked through the gaps of her fingers. She felt the stranger in front of her patting her head gently and comfortably. Feel like calming down? Mark asked with a tilt of his head. Feeling the comfortable feeling on her head, Elise was still reluctant, but she still nodded. Then, sit down and stop crying. How will your family explain what is happening if you're not calming down? Are you still a child? You are not, right? Hearing that, Elise closed her eyes and nodded. There, she started to calm down. The surroundings also returned to normal as the energy that caused the ringing sounds in everyone's ears started to dissipate. Mark guided Elise back to her bed and sat down with her. He then signaled for May and Felicia to come closer. Wow, you really pulled it off, Felicia spoke. And there, Elise suddenly fell on her back. Elise. Felicia panicked. Mark caught Elise and carried her to lie down on her bed. Don't panic. Elise is just asleep. Felicia hurried to Elise's side, confirming what Mark said. Gerger, what is happening with her? May asked Mark. I'm not a psychologist, I don't know. Mark shrugged. Well, I have an idea, why her mental energy is leaking like this. Mental energy? Felicia interjected. Is my younger sister some sort of psychic or magician? Well, sort of. And a powerful one. But she's pretty much neglected, I think. Since the commotion died down, people started to return. As they confirmed that it was safe now, although most were still reluctant to return, Felicia's family, along with the officers of the military, entered to ask Mark what was going on. Of course, Mark really had no reason to explain. However, if he did not, these people would continue to pester him or those people around him. It was better if they did not. Thus, Mark decided to take this opportunity and turn it into a meeting. It was not wrong to do this because the soldiers were also asking about what happened yesterday. And Elise was directly connected to that event. This time, Mark would explain the circumstances not only to the soldiers but also to Felicia's family in one go. It was better like this than wasting more time explaining to different parties one by one. Day 130 to 10:22 a.m. Infirmary, Audubon High School, Audubon, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. The talk about what transpired yesterday happened in the infirmary. Usually, a discussion like this would be held in private meeting rooms where only necessary people were allowed. Even Captain Morrison proposed that after they heard that Mark decided to speak. However, Mark was against it, and they could only listen. Aside from the soldiers and the curious onlookers, Hannah, Arnold, and everyone from the Bailey's Casino were also present. Without minding who was listening, Mark leaned on the wall in front of everyone. He decided to divulge almost everything that happened. From Elisa's involvement with Else, the assumed relationship of Else to the group attacking this settlement, and the reasons why Elise did that, Mark started to tell them about his first. Not only the soldiers and other survivors but Elisa's family members were also shocked to hear this. And of course, it was not surprising that many felt anger about this truth. Who would have thought that the rat in the settlement was Elise? It might be unintentional since she was not aware, but still, because of her, many people, soldiers, friends, and family, died and suffered. Some people inside the infirmary lost to their temper and tried to charge towards Elise, who was asleep. Of course, even though everyone here could understand their anger, no one would let that happen. Those people were restrained. Furthermore, it was no secret that Elise lost her memories after she learned the truth. Blaming her in this condition was akin to making someone who knew nothing take responsibility. Well, of course, if it was still the society before the outbreak, she was still punishable by law. Unfortunately, that was not the case in the apocalypse. And now, even more, no one here would be able to punish Elise as she now had Mark behind her. After some people became violent, Mark declared had he intended taking Elise and her family away. This made Abraham, Candace, and Roan very troubled. They had not come to a conclusion on that matter yet. And for everyone here, they became even more troubled than the family in question. It was because Roan, the strongest in this settlement, was the only one that could keep the outlaws in check. If he suddenly left, this place would not last any longer. Disregarding everyone's thoughts, Mark continued to tell what happened yesterday. The involvement of the outlaws to the ritual. And that the leader of the outlaws was actually someone that Felicia would never forget, Jude. Mark did not say anything about Jude's relationship to Felicia and her family, but their reactions already told everyone here that they had some sort of connection. And there, Mark told everyone that Jude, the leader of the outlaws, was already dead along with Else. That they ended up being sacrificed for the revival of a humanoid chimera that was sealed under the rumored suicide Nazi tree at the bank of Newton Lake. Of course, everyone here was skeptical about magic and stuff. They were just regular people anyway. Some even started to question Mark and thought that he was just fooling with them. Magic and monsters are just fantasy, someone murmured. Oh. Mark turned to that person. Then, explained what happened with Elise just earlier. That was a short exchange that transpired at that time. None of them could explain what happened when Elise woke up, after all. If it was not magic or psychic ability, That what was it? They had no answer. Even so, skeptics were hard to please with things. Thus, Mark conjured a black fire at the end of his index finger to show them. That made the skeptics shut up. Chemicals could change the color of fire, but it needed to be under a special light to turn black even if a chemical reaction was used. None of it was in the room. Those that knew about it could tell that a pitch-black flame was not possible even if the equipment was present. Furthermore, when Mark made the flame float steadily after removing his hand, the people here, no matter how skeptic they were, had no choice but to believe. The discussion ended up with Mark telling everyone that the chimera left after being revived. Mark did not tell anything else that was unnecessary. He left out the arrival of the other intrudes, his rampage, and his encounter with the ninth eye. It was not something that should be disclosed to these people. The discussion took some time. Mark could not help but want to end it as soon as possible. Even more, since he was uncomfortable being the center of attention of many people for too long. Lastly, Mark decided to warn the people, after we leave, you people here should leave this place too. Making everyone confused as hell, Mark decided to end this meeting. With May, Mark left the room without explaining about his last words. However, there was someone who could not stay behind anymore and followed. Back at the rooftop, Mark and May decided that they would cook something for lunch. Felicia and the others could cook their own with the food they had in the vehicle, after all. Mark took out some cooking items from his ring and started to cook some instant dry noodles. It was not hard and fast to cook. They both wanted some fresh food, but at this moment, there was nowhere to get fresh ingredients. In the middle of cooking, the person that followed them decided to show up. Mark turned around, knowing who it was. This is our food, we're not going to share. Mark said with a serious expression, making the person almost stumble. After all, this guy was not here for that. This guy was no other than Felicia's oldest sibling, her brother, Roan. Of course, he was not here to ask for food. He did not even have the slightest idea that Mark and May would proceed to cook lunch after that meeting. I'm not here for that. Roan frowned. I know, I just want to say it. Mark nonchalantly replied, making Roan sigh. What are you planning? Roan asked. About what? Mark asked in return. Roan was starting to get pissed off. He could not tell if Mark really did not know what he had done, or if he was feigning ignorance. You put our family in an awkward position. That's intentional, isn't it? Hearing that question, Mark smiled. Yeah, it's intentional. So? You. Roan pointed at Mark. However, he lowered his hand with a sigh. What do you really want from us? Despite his rising temper, Roan decided to ask peacefully. Mark talked about the matters yesterday in front of everyone. What he said might have been the truth, but it put a gap between his family and the people living in this place. The deaths, the struggle, and the pain that happened, it was because of Elise. There was no way that the victims would forgive what happened. The only thing that was holding the people from outright ostracizing his family was him, Roan. After all, despite what Elise had gotten herself into, she was still his sister. And he was the strongest person here in this settlement. Mark did all this on purpose. Do you want to force us to come with you to do all this? Roan asked once more. Since you already knew, why ask? Mark replied as he stirred the pot in front of him, and May prepared the flavorings. Staring at the boiling noodles, Mark started to speak. Frankly, the only reason I had before to ask your family to come with us, it's because I need Felicia. Hearing till that part, Roan was about to speak. After all, Mark phrased it in a way that was easily misunderstood. Don't talk. Listen first. Mark cut off Roan. You know that guy that is still unconscious? Morgan? I want to keep him around, and Felicia is needed for that. Besides, it's obvious that Felicia had feelings for Morgan. Isn't it fine to let the two together? Roan felt relieved that Mark was not aiming for his sister in the way he initially thought. About Morgan and Felicia's matter, Roan could not say anything. Last night, he saw how his sister meticulously took care of the unconscious guy. The thing between the two was too obvious to deny. Then, now, You have another reason? Roan asked. I did. Mark smiled. Elise and you. Roan was surprised. One is an unidentified psychic while another is a level 3 mutator, who won't want you two around. Level 3? What do you mean? What is a mutator anyway? Roan was confused. Mutators, it was what we in our country call people who got bit by the infected but did not turn. Instead, they got a physical superpower from the bite. Aren't you one of those? Hearing that, Roan could only nod in understanding. About the level 3 part, didn't the ability you got after getting bitten changed 2 times already? Mark tapped the spoon on the top of the pot. Understand it now? About Elise being a psychic, I think I don't have to explain it, right? Roan agreed with Mark. His ability indeed changed 2 times after he was bitten. And now, he was stronger than everyone here in this settlement. But you didn't have to do that. Letting everyone know of Elisa's fault and the connection between our family and Jude. Although it was a hostile relationship, most people would misunderstand it. Your parents left the decision-making to you, right? I just made it easier for you to decide. Mark shrugged. What if I did not want our family to follow you? Roan tried to bluff. That won't work on me. I know that you already agree with me. Mark retorted with a smile. Besides, Mark added, you don't have any choice. Even if not for Felicia, just the current state of Elise, your family can't do anything to help her without me. Mark stood up, went to the side, and drained the boiling water onto another pot. You know what is happening with Elise? Mark asked, making Roan look down. Both her psychic ability and mental age should grow side by side. That way, she was developing her own way of containing her powers to some extent without knowing. But now that she lost her memories, and her mental age regressed, she totally lost control of it. Any instability in her emotions can cause what happened earlier to repeat. Mark tapped the strainer with the noodles in it to drain the remaining water. You can think of Elisa's mind as a bucket and her psychic energy as wet sand. If a part of the bucket suddenly broke off, the wet sand will still stay in shape. But what if the broken bucket was suddenly shaken unstably? Despite the sand being wet, it will break off and scatter everywhere. Roan frowned. He did not know that this was the case at all. Since Elise was a child, she felt strange. So, this was the case. She was leaking that uncomfortable energy from her body. So, you can help her recover? Can you fix the bucket that you are saying? Roan asked. However, Mark shook his head. I don't know if I can help her with that. I can't fix the bucket. In the least, I can stop the shaking and make the sand as stable as possible. Roan contemplated and found that Mark was right. They had no choice but to follow Mark if they wanted Elise to be stable. Oh, by the way, Mark remembered something. Because of Elisa's powers, she and your family were targeted to revive the Chimera. I traded some priceless items in exchange. So your family has a really heavy debt to me. Also, since Elise had such ability, even if I let her go, she will be targeted by other people. Sooner or later, she will die in the hands of those monsters as food. In the least, I'm not that heartless. Roan bit his lips. Although he already decided to let his family come with Mark, he never knew that there were reasons like this. Now, even if Mark changed his mind, Roan would cling to him. They would beg for Mark to bring them with him. Mark smiled as he felt Roan's emotions. There, a question came out from his lips. About else. Can you tell me what happened? Day 130 to 10:51 a.m. Rooftop, Audubon High School, Audubon, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Roan was caught off guard by the sudden question and change of topic. That's it? You're ending it there and just change the subject of conversation like that? Why not? It's not like there's anything to discuss there, is it? Hearing Mark's reply, Roan paused a little to think. It was true. There was nothing to talk about his family leaving this place with Mark's group. Still, he felt discontent for some reason. All right. Roan sighed. Can I sit down with you two first? It's getting hot in my position. That question made Mark look at Roan and then look above his head. Mark and May were cooking under a small collapsible tent on the roof. Roan, on the other hand, stood under the sun ever since he arrived here. "Well, all right. Sit here," Mark said, offering a monoblock chair nearby. This tent was being used by soldiers when on the lookout. Several of these were set up across the roof of the high school buildings. And of course, the chairs were also lying around. Roan was glad that Mark would not make him stand under the sun for the rest of this conversation and approached. "But don't expect that we will share our food, all right?" Mark added, which made Roan stagger. Roan stiffly took a seat after that. "You're not taking me seriously, are you?" Roan could not help but ask that. "I'm being serious, though," Mark replied, mixing the flavoring and noodles on his plate. "We only cooked for 2 people, so we can't share." Roan held his forehead. That was not the point of his question, after all. Peeved. May could not hold it anymore and let out a giggle. Roan caught that moment and could not help but stare at the beautiful scenery. But then, 2 metal spoons suddenly covered his eyes. "What are you doing?" Roan was shocked. Mark suddenly appeared behind him and did that. "Your eyes." Mark scoffed. "If you do that again, I won't mind making you an Ultraman with these spoons." Ultraman. Roan was stupefied. Mark was definitely not taking him seriously. "Just tell us about else already," Mark urged. Roan scratched his head. "All right. It was just a short story, though. Asterisk asterisk asterisk." Roan started the story before their parents, Abraham and Candace, married. Apparently, both Abraham and Candace wanted a large family. Their father even joked about having a soccer team. That was a rather large plan. However, both Abraham and Candace wanted something like that. Nevertheless, it only ended up with 3 children. Many years passed after marriage. Candace did not give birth to a single child. At first, they did not think about it too much. But then, things got a bit suspicious, and the 2 decided to go to the hospital for a checkup. The result of the test was what they were afraid of. Both Abraham and Candace had a low fertility rate. However, they did not give up. Thus, Roan was born. Abraham and Candace were very happy to have him. After all, it was hard to get their first child. Because of their parents' condition, they valued their children a lot. Soon, Felicia followed. It still took years, though. When Felicia was already 6, it was the last time that their mother had a pregnancy. It was not because Abraham and Candace were already too old to have a child. The last pregnancy had to undergo a cesarean delivery. It was because Candace carried a pair of twins in her womb, and she could not deliver them naturally. That left some side effects, and future pregnancies might get risky for her. And that was why they valued the twins when they were born. If not for the fact that Candace had just undergone an operation that day, Abraham might have thrown a party. The twins were born healthy. It was a pair of a boy and a girl. Abraham took charge of naming the girl while Candace gave the boy's name. The girl was named Elise, and Candace partnered her with her twin as Else. That was a happy occasion. However, Felicia was not around at that time and was with their aunt because of school. Only Abraham and Roan were there. Abraham took a leave from the army at that time to aid his wife. On the other hand, Roan was on a break from school. The hospital was quite far from where they initially lived. That was why Felicia could not go until the weekend at that time. Felicia had no idea that Candace had a pair of twins. It was because the parents wanted to surprise her when she came during the weekend. It should be a happy occasion for a couple who wanted a big family. However, it was also when the disaster struck. 3 in the morning, Abraham woke up from his uncomfortable sleep. Candace had a private room. Being a soldier's wife helped them to be able to afford it. Nevertheless, there was only one bed inside. There was no way Abraham would be able to sleep properly on a chair. Since Candace had just given birth, their twins were put in nursery for the night. Being woken up, Abraham went out to check on them. Abraham arrived at the nursery window, where he should be able to see Elise and Else. He was horrified. Abraham could see the cribs with the names of his twins. but Elsa's crib was empty. He immediately called out a passing nurse to ask. However, that nurse panicked as she hurriedly checked the nursery. Else was missing on the night of his birth. The hospital staff went in emergency mode. A soldier's child had gone missing, after all. Most people have it harder once they learned that the other party had ties with the military, no matter what state or country it was. The police were called, and the hospital was searched. In the room where Candace slept, Abraham held Elise while he waited nervously. The hospital had security cameras, however, it was not heavily implemented at that time, and unfortunately, none of the cameras caught of what happened or any possible trace of the culprit. During the remainder of the night, the police and the hospital staff searched the hospital. It was to no avail. It was until morning came. Candace already woke up and learned about what happened. She held Elise weeping about Elsa's disappearance. Roan also arrived and did not feel good about what was happening. Then police received an emergency call. Abraham was called immediately to go with the police while Roan was left behind to accompany his mother. About 2 kilometers away from the hospital, the police mobile that Abraham boarded stopped at a park. When Abraham and the police officers arrived, there was already a gallery of people that were being driven away by other police officers. Abraham could not contain his nervousness as he approached the place cordoned by the police. It was definitely a crime scene. In the middle of the crime scene, the body of the victim was still there. The police took pictures of the corpse for the documentation, but their faces were obvious that they could not stomach it. In front of the police officers, there was a corpse of a newborn infant bathed in blood. Its chest and stomach were torn open. The ribs was crushed, and the heart was missing. Its guts were sprawled everywhere, and its skin and organs had sharp teeth marks. The infant's face was torn off, making it unrecognizable. Its face was nothing but torn flesh with empty eye sockets. Anyone that would see this scene would question whether the culprit was human or a beast. No, it was definitely a beast. Abraham fell on his knees after seeing that corpse. He was still in denial. However, one of the custom-made bracelets that he made his twins wear was on the infant corpse's arm. There was no denying it that the corpse was the missing Else. Abraham absent-mindedly approached the corpse, but of course, he was stopped by the police. However, being a trained soldier, the police officers had a hard time containing him, and thus, had to tase him. Although they understood his misery, maintaining the crime scene for a further investigation came first. Else did not even last a whole day before he died, and he died horribly. It was no wonder that he became a spirit lingering around his twin sister. Asterisk asterisk. I see. Mark understood. So, because of how horrible that event was, your family decided to forget about it, am I right? To Mark's question, Roan nodded. It was not Mom and Dad that brought the idea first. It was our grandparents. It's not surprising since if everyone continued to mull over it, none of us would be able to let go. We also wanted Felicia and Elise to live normally. If they knew about this, none of them would have a good life. Unfortunately, it backfired. Mark shrugged. Elise did not live a normal life at all, and Else came back for revenge for being forgotten like that. We did not forget about him at all. Roan shook his head. Every year, during their birthday, Mom and Dad will ask me to deliver flowers to Elsa's grave. Hearing that, Mark realized something. No wonder Elise grew like that. She might have felt that her birthday is not a happy occasion, right? Roan could not reply to that. After all, after Elise's birthday was Elsa's date of death. They would remember the gruesome death of that child, dampening the mood for the others' anticipated party. Hey, Roan turned to Mark. Do you think that the chimera you spoke about had something to do with this? Mark thought about it after hearing that question. In the end, he shook his head. I don't think so, but you said that they wanted Elise, right? Correction. Mark stared at Roan. What they wanted is the energy that Elise emits. They don't necessarily need to eat her if there is another energy source. I already covered that, though. Furthermore, I don't think that they will stoop that low to eat a baby in a gruesome way. Besides, at that time, they might not have found out about Elise or Else yet. Roan could only nod. The last sentence that Mark said was plausible. Then, the culprit should be someone or something else, Mark added. Is there no clues from the police investigation? That question made Roan look down. The police were stumped. It is one of a kind case, after all. Furthermore, it felt like it wasn't done by a human. That was true. Someone that would do something like that would not be human. Of course, not an animal either. Any person who would say that it was an animal would have their sanity doubted. After all, which animal could sneak out a baby from a hospital and eat it at a park 2 kilometers away? And with what Mark knew, it must have been done by a supernatural being. Then, Mark thought of something. Did anything strange happen while your mom was giving birth? Hearing that question, Roan started to think about it. Then, he remembered something. I don't know if it counts, but Dad said, the hospital's lights unstably flickered when Else was taken out of Mom's womb. All the lights in the hospital. They all thought that it's just some electricity failure, though. That's it. Mark realized something. What? Roan was confused. You know, Elise had powers, right? It's not strange for twins to both have powers if one of them had it. Have you heard about the telepathic connection between twins? It's something like that. Else might have already awakened his powers since birth, unlike Elise, who developed it more and more over time. So, are you saying that Else might have been targeted at that time the same way with Elise's circumstances right now? Probably. The possibility is very high, though. So, if we knew that he had powers since birth, his death might have been prevented, huh? Roan said while gripping his fist. You can't blame your family with that. Mark shrugged. If I'm on your father's shoes at that time, I might have thought of that either. After all, until one saw it with his own eyes, most people on Earth would not believe about ghosts, supernatural entities, or psychic powers. It was the case no matter how religious or interested in the strange things the person was. Mark was the same. It wasn't until he encountered Psycrystal that he totally believed these things and became aware that he was really an empath. Day 130 to 12:15 p.m. Audubon High School, Audubon, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. After eating lunch, Mark urged May to sleep and rest. At that time, Roan had long left the rooftop after Mark told them to prepare since their group would depart tomorrow. Right now, Mark and May were inside a room that he requested for private use. It was the room May had been using to recuperate from her injury. Mark was currently accompanying her until she had fallen asleep. At that time, looking after her would be left to Hannah, Felicia, and Sandy. Mark had to do a lot of things, after all. If not, he would stay to watch over her. It did not take long for May to fall asleep as Mark could make her feel relaxed and comfortable with his abilities. Well, time to go, I guess. Mark stretched his back as he stood from his seat beside May's bed. Hannah, don't let anyone enter except for Felicia and Sandy. Mark told Hannah. She was standing by waiting for his orders. Except for that, she was also in charge of looking after the dragonfly egg. It was currently being carried around by her. Don't worry. Even if I die, I won't let anyone in. Hannah replied. Mark shrugged to that, though. It was not a bad attitude, but it was pretty extreme. He did not need her dead either, and Odalina would be sad if Hannah died. He then went out of the room and checked for the queen type that was currently guarded by Arnold. It looked like she was behaving now after the effect of the tranquilizers wore off. Though, she seemed to be complaining since Mark was not around her for too long. Mark also checked Elisa's condition. The soldiers moved her out of the infirmary into another private room. They did it carefully and did not wake her up. No one would want what happened this morning to repeat, after all. Felicia's family was already preparing their things. There was not much to prepare, though, aside from their change of clothes, and important things they could not leave behind. As for their share of food from the settlement, Mark told them that it was not needed and leave it behind. After that, Mark talked a bit with Captain Morrison. What do you think of what I said earlier? Mark asked. Frankly, it's hard to believe. The captain shrugged. But I can't deny it either after seeing the phenomenon yesterday and what you showed us. I also heard before that the armed forces of our country had a division that primarily deals with these kinds of things. At that time, I thought that it was nothing but a hoax. But now, it might be real, after all. Our country also had a task force like that, Mark said. By the way, I've been thinking. You and your soldiers here should have received orders to evacuate people, right? What happened to all of you to stay cooped up in this place? That was one thing that Mark was curious about. These soldiers were sent to evacuate survivors. Since that was the case, there should be an actual evacuation settlement set up by the country, or at least, by the state government. Yet, these people were cooped up in this school. It was despite the danger and harassment they were facing because of the outlaws. Mark's question made Captain Morrison show a bitter expression. Initially, we are supposed to do that. At most, we only planned to stay in this place for a month, but things happened. It was not new that one of the best places for an evacuation site in a zombie apocalypse was masses of land off from the mainland. In short, islands. It did not matter whether it was natural or man-made as long as it passed the needed criterion. First and foremost, it was accommodation. The government needed an island capable of accommodating a large number of people. The second was sustenance. Was that island able to sustain the estimated number of refugees? Was there enough land for farms and buildings needed to supply the necessities of the people? The third criterion was the defensibility of the island. This included the shape of the island, how far it was from the mainland, and the possible threats that the land could face. The number of resources needed to secure the island was also considered. If an island passed all these criteria, even with a slight margin of error, it would be chosen as a good site for evacuation. Unfortunately, no island in New Jersey would pass those criteria. There were islands in New Jersey, specifically on the eastern coasts. However, not only that one of the islands contained a greater risk, the Atlantic City, none of these islands would pass the second and third criteria needed. Thus, the government of New Jersey collaborated with New York to use Staten Island as an evacuation site. It might not be too far from the mainland. However, the distance was enough to slow down most of the infected from crossing before the defenses were secured. The shape of the island was not bad, either. It also had a wide area for farming and cultivation, although it required the clearing of the forests on the island. And of course, manpower was needed, and New York, with its remaining people, would not be able to do that alone. With the survivors of New Jersey added to the mix, it would not be far for everyone to enjoy the safety of the island. The soldiers in Audubon High School performed their duties and planned to leave before the month ended as they wanted to secure as many people as they could. They also kept contact through satellite communications with the government. However, before the month ended, a radio message was received by the soldiers dispatched to evacuate the people. Staten Island has fallen. That was the only thing that the message said. If it was just that, the soldiers might not believe it. However, the message was sent in an emergency frequency that only the soldiers should know, and it came from the headquarters. They tried to contact the headquarters, but no reply came back, and not long after, all satellite communications had been cut off. Unsure of what happened and because of the lack of orders after that, the soldiers decided to stay here. They fortified the place and did their best to survive. After all, it was too risky to go on the road without a sure destination at that time. Furthermore, the U.S. government should have the means to send emergency orders to them. However, they received none. Thus, they could only rot here, wishing that their families were safe. How about that research facility the military built in Atlantic City? Mark asked. To that question, Captain Morrison shook his head. Those people are not from the forces of the state. They are directly dispatched by the U.S. government. They are not allowed to do anything outside the orders they are given. And even if we came there and they accepted us, our people here might just end up as subjects by their mad scientists there. Mark went silent. He could agree with that thought since he already met that alien professor. It could definitely happen. All right, then. Mark shrugged. I'll be off to deal with one of your troubles here. Can you write anything your people know about Philadelphia right now? I'll pick it up later. Right, your group will leave tomorrow and travel through Philadelphia. I have no problems with that. Captain Morrison nodded. But what do you mean by dealing with one of our troubles? To that question, Mark only smiled and went on his way, leaving the captain and his soldiers confused. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Leaving the soldiers, Mark stood at the rooftop of the high school once more. I should have asked that succubus where their base is before they left. Mark murmured while scratching his head. He already asked the soldiers if they had any idea where the base of the outlaws was. However, they had no concrete answer. It was because every time they tried to send someone to tail them, the person would not make it back. The only answer Mark received was that the outlaws always retreated towards the south after they attacked. That was the only clue Mark had right now. Thus, stretching his wings open, he flew towards the south. It was what Mark meant when he told Captain Morrison that he would deal with one of their troubles. Mark wanted to eliminate the outlaws. Well, that was only a byproduct, though. What Mark really wanted was to get that brother's mutator abilities. Those bone armors were not bad at all. Furthermore, those were speed-type mutations, which made Mark even more interested. There might also be others with good abilities there, or they would not be able to overwhelm the soldiers like this for too long. Mark flew as high as he could to see the terrain and buildings better. He took note of the larger buildings and tried to see if there were any visible fortifications on the buildings. Of course, he also thought that the buildings the outlaws used might not have any fortifications at all. After all, having fortifications would be too eye-catching for a band of outlaws in hiding. Well, Mark could be wrong with that thought, though, since fortifications was a must in a zombie apocalypse. There was also the thought that the outlaws only retreated south for diversion. Their base might also be located in other directions. It was not wrong to think of that since it was outlaws. They might have one or more ways of deceiving their victims. Starting at the buildings in the southeast direction, Mark checked for any signs of life. Mark flew over warehouses, malls, apartment compounds, schools, cinemas, and all the large establishments that could possibly become a base for a large number of people. Unexpectedly, he found some survivors hiding at some of the buildings he went over. It was quite hard to say whether these people were lucky or unlucky, though. Some might be lucky surviving the first 4 months of this deadly apocalypse. And they were also unlucky because they were stuck in those buildings unable to leave at all. These buildings with survivors were easier to spot because of the basins and wide-mouthed containers lined up on the rooftop. Obviously, these containers were used to gather clean water from rain or snow. Well, the best factor that made these people last this long was the fact that they did not put any signs asking for help on the face of their buildings. If they did, the outlaws might have spotted them long ago, and they would have either died or turned into slaves and playthings. Instead, they put SOS signs on the rooftops. It seemed that instead of asking help from random people, they gambled on flying military vehicles instead. Of course, it was a futile hope. After all, the last aircraft that flew over these areas was back in the first week of the apocalypse. Some survivors spotted Mark flying over the area. Of course, instead of asking for help, they ran and hid. Who would ask help from a creature with several wings, after all? Unless Mark came to introduce himself, these people would see him as a threat. As Mark flew around, he could not help but become troubled. He started thinking that retreating south was really a diversion made by the outlaws. But after flying for about an hour, Mark found some activity. Damn, I flew towards the wrong direction first. Mark complained as he finally found the location he was looking for. The direction he flew first was to the southeast when the base of the outlaws was located a bit southwest of Audubon High School. And seeing the scene below, Mark's eyes could not help but light up. There were about 300 people in the place. 50 of them were mutators, while there seemed to be around 100 slaves. The best part, however, the whole base was in a mess. It was because of the absence of their leaders. The outlaws started to fight over who would be the next to lead everyone. Day 130 to 2:19 p.m. Browning Square, Belmar, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Browning Square. It was where the outlaws previously led by Jude, Ilya, and else resided. With the sudden disappearance of their leaders, however, turned the place upside down. These outlaws had their respective factions within this group. All these factions were held together by Jude using force and coercion. Not what they were gone. The strongest ones among the outlaws started to contend for leadership. After all, to these kinds of people, who did not want to be the leader was feared, had benefits, and command the whole group. There were a lot of benefits to being the leader of a lawless group like this. But of course, the question was whether they would be able to defeat the other contenders for the position. And there was the problem lay. It should be just a contest between powers, or everything would be meaningless. If one of the factions could suppress the others, things would immediately end with a new leader rising in the group. The winning side would not wantonly kill the losing side either since, without enough members, the group would cease to function. But what about if the factions had equal power and none of them wanted to admit defeat? It would turn into a deadly battle. That was what was currently happening in the Browning Square. 3 factions were fighting for supremacy, and each side had 2 leaders. One of the factions had already been defeated after one of their leaders died and the other heavily injured. Now, what was left of them stood watching by the side as the 2 remaining factions fought each other. In the remaining 2 factions, one was led by the Swift brothers. Because of the failure of their last mission, they had lost a lot of people under them. However, the 2 alone managed to fight equally against the members of the opposite side. As for the other side, it was led by a man and a woman. Behind them were the stronger members of this group. And right now, both groups were facing against each other in a death match. Mark used optical camouflage on himself and landed atop the concrete signboard of the Browning Square. It was very close to the 2 groups currently facing each other. Looking around, Mark found too many dead bodies. It seemed that these people did not care anymore who would die in this battle. The slaves had it worse and were dragged into this bloodshed too. Swift brothers, you pair of cowards. Just give up. The woman on the opposite faction called out with arrogance. Mark looked at her and could not help but feel interested. Of course, not because he was a woman, but because of her mutation. Both her arm and legs were covered in rainbow-colored scales, and she had claws as white as pearl. Most people might only see it as something beautiful, but Mark could feel that it was more than just that. Dragon scales. Mark murmured. He was not sure about it. However, he felt a familiar vibe from these scales. It was similar to the mutation of the boss and the young master of Death Valley Settlement. If that was the case, it was no wonder that the Swift brothers were having a hard time facing her. Don't *CK with me. The older one of the Swift brothers charged forward. Blood splattered around as he cut the heads of the woman's lackeys that tried to block him. He then appeared behind the woman, trying to behead her too. But before his bone blade could reach her neck, the woman raised her arm. Clang! The older Swift failed his attack, and he could only retreat. Mark watched that happen and could only nod. Both these brothers were speed types. Although their bone blades were sharp, they were still lacking in strength to be able to cut through the woman's scales. Furthermore, the younger brother was also entangled against the other leader of the opposing faction. The second leader was a muscular man. He had exaggeratedly bulging muscles with an unnatural copper sheen. Furthermore, he was only wearing Speedos. No matter how one looked at him, he looked like he just went out of a bodybuilding competition after overdosing steroids. And the worst of it, honey, just give up. You and your brother are on the losing side already. He had a sharp, campy voice that did not match his appearance at all. Just what manga did that guy jumped out of? Mark murmured with a shiver. Seeing this in real life, he could not understand how anime and manga protagonists felt after encountering such a creature. *CK off. The younger Swift brother shouted as he disappeared in place. He then appeared, crouching to the side of the Speedo guy, slashing his bone blade towards the enemy's leg. Packin'. However, that sound of breaking metal echoed as the Speedo guy slapped the blade from above, breaking it into 2. The Speedo guy then followed with a punch. The punch seemed weak. However, the pressure that it gave was enough to make a person freeze in fear. Of course, the punch missed, unable to match the speed of the younger swift brother. It's a stalemate, huh? That was Mark's deduction of the situation. Since the leaders of the factions could not do anything to each other, it was no wonder that the people following their leaders were the ones dying instead. To win this battle, the leader of the other faction should at least submit. However, both sides could not do anything to deal with each other. If the woman with rainbow scales and the Speedo guy wanted to win, they needed to catch the Swift brothers. However, they did not have the speed required to do so. The only thing they could do was stand in place and anticipate the attack of the brothers and aim for a counterattack. On the other hand, while the Swift brothers had the speed, they lacked the strength to defeat the two enemy leaders. Furthermore, since the two enemies were not attacking, the brothers had no choice but to keep charging. What made the situation even worse was that the battle here had drawn the attention of the infected. Many of them were running to this place. Soon, the walls will be knocked down, and this place will become a graveyard. Mark said after seeing the large number of infected trying to break down the walls that the outlaws erected around this place. Some were trying to clear the infected from their positions, however, they were lacking in hands as many people already died because of the power struggle. "I'll wait a bit," Mark said as he searched for a comfortable sitting position atop the concrete signboard. After 5 minutes, however, Mark was already yawning. The leaders had their strengths and weaknesses, and this battle had the worst pairing. Those brothers had too much pride. It should be easier if they both dealt with one enemy first before killing the other. That was what Mark observed. These brothers were cowards if their enemy was far stronger than them, but if it was equal or below to them in strength, they would not budge. The Swift brothers wanted to deal with one leader each, and it was more like they were competing on who would be able to defeat their enemy instead. "But it's not getting anywhere," Mark complained. "They're just wasting time." Mark then turned to the side. "At the end of this all, that guy will be the true winner." There, a man was smiling as he rested leaning to the wall of a pizza house. The man looked heavily injured. Nevertheless, Mark knew that the guy was only pretending. "Oh, well." Mark stretched his arms and back. "I'll free the imprisoned people first and let them wait outside." Mark murmured after giving the battle the last glance. He then jumped off and sneaked into the main building. Inside the main building that was made to look like an extravagant castle by Jude's command, there were 2 dungeons. These 2 places segregated male and female prisoners. The males were used for manual labor while the females became playthings for the sexually frustrated outlaws. And all of them had already given up on their current life. After all, whether they live here or escape, what was waiting for them was death. Although they were suffering, in the least, they could live longer. Of course, some could not stand it and already took their own lives. The ones left here were those that were afraid to die. Now, all of them were only waiting for the outcome of the change of regime in this group of outlaws. But at this moment, WHO, or you, and how did you get in here? The enraged shouts of the guards were heard by the prisoners. They all felt curious and afraid. None of the prisoners knew what was happening, after all. No answers were heard for that question, however. Instead, splat. Roll. The prisoners saw the heads of the guards rolling on the other side of the dungeon, splattering blood all over. They were all terrified at that scene. Then, they saw a man using 2 odd-looking blades walking in front of their dungeons, not minding the splashing of blood under his feet. The man faced the metal bars of the dungeon, looking at the prisoners. There, the prisoners felt terrified when the man raised his blades toward them. They could not help but turn their heads in fear. Shing! Shing! Clang! The sounds of metal clashing with each other and falling to the floor echoed across the building. "All of you should prepare to get out." They heard the man speak and looked in front of them in shock. The metal bars that confined them had already cut into pieces. That was when the thought caught up to their minds. The person standing in front of them was here to set them free. "Are you here to help us?" one of the male prisoners asked. Don't ask too many questions, Mark replied. Just follow behind me if all of you want to get out of this place. Also, carry the ones that can't walk properly. I don't want to waste time waiting for slowpokes. The male prisoner gulped. The others also just followed Mark's commands. More than the fear they felt from him, they all just want to get away from this place. Even if Mark was a stranger to them, this could only be their chance to escape. To the prisoners' surprise, Mark was blatantly leading them out of the main door instead of sneaking out through somewhere secluded. Sir, isn't it better if we just sneak out? A female prisoner asked. Why? Mark turned and tilted his head. We are escaping, right? The female prisoner hesitated but still asked. No, I'll make it clear, Mark shrugged. I'm not leading you all to escape. I'm leading you all out to leave this place. Get the difference? Sir, you don't mean. Most of the prisoners gulped their saliva. Yeep, we will leave this place straight in front of them. In a sense, I guess. Actually, I plan to kill all those that captured you guys. I just let you all out first since it will be troublesome if they suddenly took all of you as a hostage. Hearing that declaration, the prisoners felt their legs go weak. They looked at Mark. This guy doesn't seem to know fear, they all thought. There, several steps could be heard from the main hall. Stop! A shout was heard, and a dozen people armed with guns blocked Mark and the prisoners. We're doomed. Some of the prisoners cried out, on the contrary. I guess, let's try this one out, Mark said with a smile as he stretched his right arm forwards with his palm facing the enemies. A crystal then appeared in front of this palm, which emitted a faint glow. Then, the armed men in front of them froze to the prisoners' shock. That was when the prisoners noticed something odd. Lines of blood appeared on the faces of the outlaws, and their clothes started to divide by itself. Plop! 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 That was when the standing armed outlaws started to crumble, turning into pieces of sliced flesh and bones that splattered on the ground. Day 130 to 2:48 p.m. Browning Square, Belmar, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Plop! Plop! Splat! Splat! Squish! Those eerie sounds echoed in everyone's ears in the main hall very clearly. It was despite how noisy it was outside because of the ongoing battle between the factions of the outlaws. Looking at the slowly slipping slices of human flesh as each piece fell on the ground one by one, accompanied by a splatter of blood, Mark noticed something. Clang! Clang! Pieces of metal also fell from the guns that the outlaws held. I messed up the controls, huh? Mark murmured. He only wanted to kill these guys and, at least, get their guns for the prisoners to use. But of course, since it was the very first time he used the new crystal he had, the wind manipulation crystal, his control was not perfect. Although he managed not to break the weapons too much, bits and pieces still got sliced off them, rendering the guns unusable. Flario's Miriul. He was the previous owner of this ability. He was the frivolous and narcissistic son of one of the ministers of Freed's father, the king of Arielis, before Freed took over the throne without a choice. A famous womanizer to an annoying degree, it was the perfect description for Flario's if someone was to ask. Every single time he saw a beautiful woman, he would try to hit on them. The most annoying part, however, was that a lot of them would fall to this frivolous man. That made it even easier for other men to hate this guy. The only thing that changed this guy was when the outbreak came. Well, his change was only small, but it made him a bit acceptable for the same gender. It was because his whole family was killed by a strong psychic infected at the time they were evacuating. From there, he became one of Freed's vassals and one of the last protectors of Arielis before it fell. Of course, he caused a lot of problems as he tried to hit with girls in the group, only to be physically rejected by them. It was not surprising since the only girls who would manage to survive the outbreak were not people that were easily swayed by his sweet words. The most annoying thing about him was that his ability was among the strongest in the group. Flario's psychic power was not just blowing wind or controlling it. His wind manipulation was unlike most of the abilities that only focused on one kind of attack like wind blades, wind arrow, or gale blow. It was an ability higher than those and allowed Flarios to control, move, and shape the air as long as he had the right image, focus, and knowledge. That was also the problem in his ability. Being a frivolous person before the outbreak, Flarios had no knowledge to properly use his powers and had to study and practice it hard afterward. Like what Mark did just now, he molded the air into thin blades by increasing the air pressure into thin lines and launched it forward. He used an image similar to a water jet cutter with a wide nozzle. And this was the result. The outlaws in front were cut into layers of flesh instantly. This was one reason that made wind-based abilities frightening in real life. Unless the air was mixed with chemicals in high concentration, it was transparent, tasteless, and odorless. Because of it, even if Mark was already spotted, he was still able to launch a surprise attack and instantly killed the enemies. URPH. Mark could not help but pause and turn behind him as he heard that noise. Well, of course. Mark shrugged. Most of the prisoners were not able to stand the bloody scene in front. It was not like they were not used to blood or anything. These people were survivors that made it this far in the apocalypse, and all of them already had their fair share of killing, specifically, the infected. Still, there was a different sensation to seeing the infected with their disgusting wounds and killing them by shooting or destroying their brain and neck, compared to a living human suddenly turning into piles of steak slices. What made Mark appreciate these people, however, was that even though their stomachs were already churning, they forced to hold it in and did not throw up. Well, it was not they did not want to, but they were forced not to as they were afraid that Mark would get annoyed. I guess that thought also works. Mark shrugged as he turned around. Follow closely, or I won't be able to protect any of you. Mark then continued on the way, passing through the piles of flesh on the floor. Despite how repulsive it was for the prisoners, they carried on and followed Mark. It was even if their feet were soaked with the blood from the dead outlaws. Soon, the whole group of prisoners, led by Mark, fearfully stepped out of the building. Shish. Mark signaled the prisoners with a mischievous smile. It was because a small group from the defeated third faction with their leader was intently watching the battle between the leaders of the other two sides. How's the fight? Still at a stalemate, Mark suddenly spoke to the group, making the prisoners shocked. Unexpectedly. Yeah, it seemed that it won't end anytime soon. One of the guys answered without looking at Mark. They looked awfully tired already. Shouldn't boss throw in some help now? Mark asked, glancing at the fight in the middle of Browning Square. Yeah, boss. Why don't we help them now? One of the members of the group turned to their boss, sitting down and leaning his back onto the wall. It seemed that these guys knew that their boss was just pretending to be defeated. It's still not the right time. Let them kill each other first, the boss replied with a sinister smile. You should stand close and wait for my signal. The boss replied to his lackeys and turned to Mark, thinking that he was one of them. That was when he did not manage to finish his sentence, and his voice trailed off. It was because he could not recognize Mark at all. As their boss suddenly became silent, the members of their group turned to him only to see him looking at something with an incredulous expression. They all turned to what their boss was looking at and saw Mark. They all stared at him the same way, unable to comprehend who this guy was, how he was able to come here, and why the prisoners were not in their dungeon and following behind him. Oh, hello. Mark waved at them with a smile. Intru. The boss shouted as what was happening finally registered on his mind. He also tried to use his mutator ability and transformed. His eyes turned yellow, and the pupils turned into slits. Greenish-gray scales with diamond patterns also appeared on his face and neck with his tongue, elongating and split at the end. Before he could finish his shout or transform, though, the boss saw his vision spinning. The last thing he saw was the heads of his subordinates spinning together with him. No. The boss thought as he saw their group's headless bodies slump to the ground before his vision went black. A poisonous snake mutation, huh? Mark murmured as he picked up the boss's head and turned the remaining blood on the head into metal so it would stop dripping. He then threw it into the hole that appeared in front of him. The prisoners were both surprised, while some had stifled laughs at how comical that scene was. Intruders. Well, of course. After that happened, it was not surprising that they were spotted. Being spotted was not the right term, though. In the first place, they were not hiding at all. That shout froze everyone, including the 4 faction leaders that were currently fighting. They all turned to Mark and the prisoners. Many of the prisoners' legs gave way as a lot of guns were now pointed at them. "Who are you?" The older Swift brother shouted at Mark, knowing that he should be the intruder as he led the prisoners out. Of course, the 4 leaders decided to stop the fight with a glance as they faced Mark. Then, they also saw the headless corpses in front of him. "Don't mind us and continue fighting," Mark nonchalantly shouted back before turning to the prisoners behind him. "All of you stand up. Let's go." The prisoners stared at Mark incredulously. They could not fathom what was happening in his head at all. They were already surrounded with guns pointed at them. Why was Mark not fazed at all? "Stop!" the younger Swift brother shouted as Mark took a step to leave. Mark then turned to the brothers with a smile. "You two sure want me to stop? Really? After the 2 of you ran away from me yesterday?" "Yesterday?" the younger Swift brother questioned as he could not fathom what Mark was talking about. However, the older brother froze and got into his fighting stance. There was only one person that they escaped from yesterday. "You're that Grim Reaper." The older brother spoke with a grim tone as if he saw his mortal enemy. Hearing what the older Swift brother called Mark, the other members of the Outlaws felt stupid. Grim Reaper? This guy that looked like a lackey from a gang movie was? "Are you sure about that?" the woman with rainbow scales that stood close to the older Swift brother asked. She was also disinclined to believe what he was saying. It might also be just a ploy to catch her off guard. But there, her expression turned from nonchalant to very serious. It was because she saw the older brother's expression, and it was clear that he was not joking around. "Shoot!" the older brother shouted. "Don't mind if the prisoners and slaves get caught in the crossfire. Kill that bastard." Bam! Late, Mark spoke as everyone froze. Not a single gunshot was fired as all the lackeys were frozen in fear. They wanted to pull the trigger of their guns, but their shivering fingers would not follow their command at all. They could only stare at Mark, whose eyes were glowing brightly in red color. Bam! Their legs shivered. Not to mention shooting, it even became harder for these people to stand. Bam! They started to choke. It became too hard to breathe. The most affected ones were the members of the Outlaws that were just regular humans. One by one, they started to fall on their knees. As for the 4 faction leaders and the other mutators, they were still standing. For the regular mutators, it was very hard to do so, however. The only ones that still managed to resist better were the 4 faction leaders. These 4 were level 2 mutators. After all, it was harder for them to go down. **T. What is this?" the older Swift brother cursed as he saw his remaining lackeys fall. It was the same for the younger Swift brother, rainbow-scaled woman, and Speedo guy. They could not fathom what was happening at all. "Well, then," Mark spoke in a loud voice. "You 4 and all those that can still stand. Let's make a bet. Don't FCK with me. I'll kill you." The younger Swift brother was about to charge in. He could not take the humiliation from yesterday, and now, Mark was obviously playing with them. But then, the younger brother froze as he felt a hand on his bone-armored shoulder. "Bro, don't be rash." The older brother held his younger brother with a scary expression, forcing the younger to calm down. "What bet do you want?" the older Swift brother asked Mark. "Nothing much." Mark smiled sinisterly. "I'll let you all be able to move around freely. I'll attack 10 times. Those that can survive the attacks can be left alive. Be sure that you all only stay in the parking area. All those that go out will be killed immediately." Hearing the conditions, the 4 faction leaders looked at each other and nodded. What could the enemy do in 10 attacks anyway? He was just one person, and there was still a lot of them. Furthermore, the attack just now only seemed to restrict the movements and not kill. Even if some people died, there was no way that Mark would be able to kill them all in just 10 attacks. We agree. The 4 leaders replied in unison. They knew that fighting under this restriction was deadlier than accepting the gamble. Knowing what was going on with their emotions, Mark smiled. Several crystals magically flew around his right arm as his body was covered in black haze, forming a cloak. Bat wings sprouted from his back as he flew up under everyone's amazed gaze. Get ready then. They heard Mark's playful voice was heard as he stretched his right hand forward. There, they could only stare at the sky with their wide eyes as hundreds of fist-sized balls of electricity appeared behind Mark. Day 130 to 2:58 p.m. Browning Square, Belmar, Camden County, New Jersey, United States of America. Everyone stared agape at the scene above them. Especially for the members of the Outlaws, they froze like statues. Boss. Bosses, I don't think that this is what we signed up for. A mutator that stood closer to the 4 leaders voiced out in a fearful voice. As the new leader of the group was still undecided, the man hesitated which person was to address. And absolutely, this was not what they thought of when Mark proposed that bet. They should have thought about it more. Why would the intruder propose only 10 attacks? It was a very small number compared to their remaining members. Now, no wonder. The enemy's 10 attacks were to this degree. They should have considered it further. However, to think of it, the attacks of the enemy were like this. Even without the bet, there was no guarantee that they would survive. If they did not agree to this, the enemy would be able to attack as much as he wanted. There was no escape if that was what happened. 10. Just 10 attacks. Hold out and survive. The woman disregarded the mutator's question and shouted encouragement for everyone to hear. On the other hand, while the outlaws were panicking, the prisoners watching at the sides stared at Mark in awe. Is he a god? Are we saved by a god? One of them murmured. That murmur, however, caused the prisoners to shake in delight and praise. The outlaws and the prisoners had different ideas from seeing Mark's current display. More or less, the outlaws did not believe in gods and the like. That was how they were able to commit deeds that even the heavens would feel disgusted from seeing them. In the eyes of the outlaws, Mark was nothing but a powerful freak that could kill everyone. The prisoners, however, could only pray to the gods while they suffered under the torture of the outlaws. That hope they held unto finally came into fruition. It was no wonder they unconsciously start to delude themselves into thinking that they were saved by an existence they prayed to. Well, rather than blaming the beliefs of the poor prisoners, it was better to blame Mark for it. Just who wanted to be flashy this time? At the airspace above Browning Square, however, Mark felt troubled as he detected the reverence of the prisoners he freed. Mark did not want to show off or anything. He just wanted to test something like the balls of electricity floating around him. If he did this while on the ground, it would be harder to aim at the enemies, and there would be not enough space to conjure this many. As for the black cloak made of miasma, it was just a preventive measure. With this cloak, it would be harder to pinpoint his body parts because it looked larger and covered his whole body. After all, while he was exhibiting a haughty behavior towards the enemies, he was not looking down on them. Mutagen caused people to have all kinds of uncanny mutations. Looking down on their enemies would spell demise to anyone once they encountered someone with a strange ability. All right, get ready. Mark called out playfully, causing the outlaws to stiffen. Without waiting for any answer, Mark waved his hand downwards, making the glowing crystals follow its movements. Shhoom. Crackle. Crackle. The outlaws panicked even more as hundreds of balls of electricity rained upon them. Evade. Quick. The rainbow-scaled woman shouted, assuming command over everyone. It was all right with the Speedo guy, but the Swift brothers glared at her. However, there was no time to retort. The first attack was already coming. Crack. Everyone tried their best to dodge every ball of electricity that fell. Fortunately for them, every ball of electricity only flew in a straight direction. Each one that touched anything would disappear. The speed of the balls was fast but not too speedy that it was hard to follow even with a regular person's eye. Of course, this did not mean that it would be easy. Not everyone was perceptive enough to dodge a barrage of attacks like this. Ah! Painful screams echoed here and there. The number of balls of lightning falling onto everyone was too much for many of the outlaws. Even if they were all mutators and evolvers, not every one of them had enhanced speed and reflexes. One by one, the outlaws hit by the balls of electricity fell to the ground with their convulsing bodies. Mark watched the mess he created below with a smile. He was quite satisfied with what he did. No, he was not satisfied with the worms squirming around in the parking area. What he was satisfied with was the balls of electricity he created for the first time. After all, this was something quite impossible to do before. It was an exaggeration to say that the lightning mental crystal was capable of controlling lightning. What it could at most was to conjure electricity up to high voltages and firing it off towards a certain direction. Even saying that the lightning he fired flew in a straight direction was also far-fetched. After all, that was not how electricity worked. That was why, until now, Mark could only launch direct lightning attacks at his targets. The only exception was when he was using the Stormcaller mental crystal, together with the lightning mental crystal. At those times, Mark could use the electric charge caused by the friction of substances in the clouds and call forth a strike of lightning from above. Lightning, no, even just a lower voltage of electricity, was highly unstable. This was the reason it was hard to harness and control. Furthermore, it was highly attracted to conductive materials such as metal. The presence of metal and other highly conductive substances in the air could cause a shift in the trajectory of the lightning attack. It was one of the reasons why lightning would branch out even if Mark used it to attack directly. In fact, every time Mark used a lightning attack on armed enemies, if their weapons were metallic, like guns and blades, it would get struck first before the enemy's body. It was unnoticeable since there was just split seconds after the attack was launched and before it hit the target. This was something not easily seen, even to the eyes of mutators. But now, Mark had a new toy to play with, the wind manipulation mental crystal. With the new crystal, Mark converged the metallic colloids and vapors in the air at a single point, creating an invisible conductor. Then, he stimulated the electrons around to charge it with electricity. With the conductor in place, the electricity would form a ball, traveling through the conductive colloids. Repeating the process simultaneously, it created the hundreds of balls of electricity that was currently falling onto the outlaws. Mark noticed something which made him smile. Below, the Swift brothers were good at dodging the balls of electricity. Among all of the people Mark encountered before, their reflexes and speed were top-notch. Of course, it did not mean that they were the strongest. If that Jersey Devil were to fight with these two, they would lose immediately. It was because aside from its defense that was on the lower side, the Jersey Devil had enough strength to lift a tank despite having the movement speed of a fired bullet. On the other hand, the rainbow-scaled woman was rather interesting. She was not dodging at all but was attacking the balls of electricity that would hit her using her claws and scales. It seemed that her scales also served as an insulator, preventing the electricity from harming her. At the side, the Speedo guy had it easier. The guy lifted a whole car sidewards and made it a wall where he sat behind it together with the other outlaws. Well, I didn't give any rules about using shields. So, this is not against the rules, I guess. Mark scratched his head. Following the Speedo guy's lead, the remaining outlaws hid behind cars and posts. Some smarter ones fired their guns towards the balls of electricity. The tips of the bullets that were made out of lead might not be that conductive. Still, it could disrupt the flow of electricity that Mark conjured to some degree. Soon, the first attack ended, and there, I'm still alive. One of the outlaws that fell after being hit by one of the balls of electricity shouted in glee. Not only him, but there were also others. It was not surprising since the voltage of the electricity in those balls were not too high. Although it was deadly towards regular humans, mutators and evolvers could possibly handle it. Of course, it did not mean that they were unscathed. Most of those outlaws only managed to survive because the balls of electricity hit their guns first and only caused burns on their arms. They only fell because of the shock caused by the sudden entry of electricity in their bodies. Nevertheless, only a third of the outlaws remained. A lot of them were either dumb, weak, or unlucky and died after being hit several times. Some of them even died instantly after being hit once. It was because they either got hit on their heads and torso, frying their brain or stopping their heart. Good job, everyone. Receive the next attack. Mark shouted as he conjured the same number of balls of electricity around him. This scene made everyone look at him incredulously. It was the same attack, after all. On the contrary, Mark sneered at their expressions. With that sneering smile, Mark stretched out his hand forwards and rotated it slightly. The balls of electricity started to spin around Mark, making it look like the balls were dancing around him. It was a beautiful scene circling around the god of destruction. This scene made the outlaws pale, however. Most of them only managed to survive after using the cars in the parking area as shields. Now, however, the balls of lightning would not only come from above but also at different angles. FCK this shit. One of the outlaws lost himself. He was among the ones that got hit in the first round. He was feeling numb all over his body, and there was no way for him to dodge the next attack if it was like this. He knew that he would die. Then, it was better to take someone else with him. Shakily raising the assault rifle that he just picked up, he aimed at the prisoners, causing them to freeze in fear. Thom. A loud sound accompanied by deafening crackles entered everyone's ear. Then, the smell of burnt clothes and charred flesh entered their noses. A thick strike of lightning swallowed the man, burning his whole body black. Dead, his charred body slammed to the ground. Listen! Mark shouted. The rest of the outlaws shivered as they turned their heads back to Mark like broken dolls. I'm following the rules here and will really leave the ones that can survive my attacks alive. So, follow the rules too, if none of you want to follow this fool. Finishing his sentence, Mark waved his hand. The head of the charred man suddenly detached. Then, he launched a ball of black fire towards the body, turning it into ash. The only thing left of that guy was his broken gun, and his head that was cooked. Extremely well done. The agony with his mouth left open was etched on his face even after death. Well, then. Go! Mark shouted as he launched the next attack, spinning all together in a blanket of crackling lights. The outlaws' faces looked even more serene. They all realized that their enemy could kill them all in a blink of an eye. They did not know whether he was showing mercy or was just playing. However, they did not have any choice now. Just how did they offend an enemy like this? While the outlaws were on a deep dilemma, Mark stared at the moving balls of electricity. Is this how bosses of Danmaku games feel like while tormenting the players? Mark shrugged with the nonsense that entered his head.